Recently on Instagram, I posted a fluid dynamics reel showing some sweet motion design I did in Blender to represent like a skincare or hydration brand. Without further ado, we can just look at these images. So we're going to just go through some of the animations that I've made for this, and we're going to just cover how to create all of these simulations. Now, they are a bit unorthodox, and you might be surprised how I made some of these, but that's why we're making this tutorial, because there are a lot of other ways of doing things that might help you free yourself and be more creative while you're working. Before we start, I want to cover a couple of things that will make sure that your renders look correct. Now, when I see people render bubbles, a lot of times it's easy to miss one simple step. You might say, isn't a bubble just a sphere that you throw in a particle system? And yeah, it is. But if you invert the normals on your sphere, then it will look like there's air inside of it. If you don't, it will look like water molecules inside of more water, which will look very similar to the air, but it will look wrong. So we can see a bigger image of that here. Substantially better. Makes a huge difference. You might also be surprised to find out that not a single one of these visuals used fluid simulations. What's my secret? Cloth simulations. Now you might not realize it, but cloth simulations actually even have some fluid functions built into them. So we're going to cover that. So let's just hop in and let's get started. Alrighty, we are in a new scene here. We're just going to select everything and delete, and then we're going to save this somewhere useful. We're going to call this Fluids. And then we're going to come up to the Edit tab, and we are going to click on Preferences. We need to add the extra, so type in Extra Mesh Objects. So right here, this one right here. Alrighty, then when you hit Shift A, you should find a round cube, which you can then open this left corner menu and change the operator preset to quad sphere, which then gives us this wonderful sphere that has nice topology that we can shade smooth. Now, let's just duplicate this and hit GX to move it to the side, and we're just going to call this a bubble. Now we talked about inverting the bubble normals, so in the viewport overlays up here in the top right corner of the viewport, we can click face orientation, and then if we select our bubble object and then hit Alt N, flip, and then tab, we can see that that is inverted. So then we're going to uncheck face orientation and come back to this guy. We're going to duplicate it again, scale it up, and hit Control 1 to add a subdivision modifier, and then we're going to call this skin. And then this other round cube we're going to call the fluid bouncy balls. Just like that. We're going to also just hide this skin for now because we just need to focus on this. So then we're going to hit Tab, and I'm just going to use the scale, Shift D, and Control L to just move these around and just make a collection of little spheres that I like, that I think fits our simulation. I'm not going to do too many of these just to keep the sim light and fast for you guys to follow along, but you can do as much as your computer and your vision demands. That's looking pretty good for me. So I'm going to hit Tab and Control S, and then the next step is to add a cloth modifier. So in here we need to change the quality steps up here to like 10. Then we're going to turn on the pressure and add 10 to that and change our fluid density to 0.1. Then we're going to find our cache, open that, shape, and collisions, and then we're going to change the collisions to 10 on the quality, and then check self collisions as well. We also need to come into field weights and turn off gravity unless you want them to fall onto something. Then you can use gravity. But for this case, it does not need it. Alrighty. Then if we play, we can see that now they are not affected by gravity, which is awesome. So we're just going to, I'm going to tab in here a rotate Z 180. I kind of want these other shapes to be on the front. Control L, scale, tab. And that looks pretty darn good. I'm going to move these a bit closer to each other so that we don't have too much insanity going on when we simulate these. Cool. All right, the next step is to Shift A, add a force field, and add a force. We're going to set this strength to -1000, and then we're going to just hit spacebar and see how these work. We're going to look at how they collide with one another, and we're going to hit Z wireframe just to see if we see anything colliding or penetrating one of the other surfaces. We look good, but if it does happen, it usually means that one of your spheres was intersecting with it before the simulation starts, or that your collision number is too low on the quality here, which then you can increase it up to like 12, but 10 usually gives us everything we need. So this is looking great. We're going to hit Control 1 to add a subdivision modifier to that too. That's looking really nice. Get some good bounce and compression in between these spheres. I love that. So the next step is to bake this out as an alembic. So we're going to go Export Alembic, check Selected Objects, check Apply Subdivisions, and uncheck the Export Hair. Then we're just going to export that to our same folder. It should go fairly quickly. Alrighty, then we're going to save our Fluid Bouncy Balls cloth sim for later. And we're going to click File, Import Alembic, and just bring that other one back in. And now it runs really nice and fast in our viewport, and it is an object, which means we can scale it and the simulation will still run and can be affected in different ways. The reason we did this is because the particle simulation that we're going to add here works much better when it is an alembic instead of the baked geometry. So in this particle system we made, we're going to call this bubbles, and then we're going to hit hair, and then we're going to click source, emit from volume, and then we're going to bring the jitter amount to 2. Then we're going to click on render, renders object, and then we're going to check this and just select the bubble. Then we're going to hit scale roundness and put it to 0.8. I'm going to bring this down to like 0.25 or something. Now let's go into this view just to see what we've got. That's too many. Let's bring this number down to like 500. And let's bring this to 0.01 and just see how that looks. Yeah, that's looking pretty okay. I think I would like this to make, can we go above? No, dang, we can't go above 2. Okay, well, yeah, we'll just stick with that. Maybe bring this up to 0.9. Yeah, that's better. I think that's all right. Let's move on. So now we need a, okay, there we go. Then I'm going to come to the material section. We're going to make our glass shader. So we need to click on the base color and just drag this value all the way to the top because it starts at 0.8. Then we're going to take our roughness down to 0. Then we're going to click on our transmission and hit 1. Then our IOR to 1.33, which is the index of refraction of water. Alrighty, now we have a sweet glass color, but we need to assign that to our bubble as well. So we'll just drop this down, and we need to make sure that that's labeled glass so we know what it is. Now that's looking really nice. Sweet. Awesome. Okay, next step is bringing our skin back in, and we just need to make sure that it encases everything within this view. We can maybe scale it down a little bit. It just needs to encase all of these other spheres, or the simulation will look unusual. And then we're just going to come to the modifier tab, and we're going to find a shrink wrap. And then we're going to drop or select our Fluid Bouncy Balls Alembic. And let's just name this with an ABC so that we can tell it apart from the other one. And now we can see it is making this cool look. But we're going to bring the shrink wrap behind the subdivision surface. And then we're going to bring this offset until it covers all of the bouncy balls. And then when we play, it will adjust just like that. But then on top of that, we're going to add a smooth just to bring out that softness just a bit. And then we're going to repeat it by 5. And that's just going to make it extra soft and easy to work with. And it's going to just look a little bit better, because sometimes the shrink wrap can have a few glitches, and so the smooth makes it work just a bit better. Alrighty, that's fine. And when it's in its extended state, then it might be okay. Let's see how far it is from him. Yeah, that's a bit too far for me. So we're going to leave that at the 0.2 that it was, because as long as they're inside of it on this part, then we're totally okay. So maybe that's how we should dial it in. We should bring it in on these like this and just see how close we can get it. Okay, that's pretty good. Alrighty, so now we have this cool moving surface, and we're just going to also add a solidify modifier to that before the smooth. Now this will be kind of nice. We don't want it to intersect with anything. So we're going to change that offset to 1 so that it goes outward. Yeah, that's good. That is good. Alrighty. Next, we're going to just come into this rendered view so that we can see. Yeah, cool. And then we need to add the glass material to it. Let's find a less overbearing view. Yeah, that's all right. I think maybe 0.1 is a better offset for these. Yeah, that looks much better. Alrighty, then we need a particle system on these skins. We're going to add that. We're going to change it to hair number to 2500. Then we're going to say it's on the faces. Whoops. And we're going to increase the jitter amount object, and we're just going to drop or select that bubble again. And then we're going to increase our scale randomness to 0.9 and just dial in that size. I'm going to put it at 0.005 just because I want these to not distract from the larger bubbles inside of these bouncy balls. Okay, so next step here is to set up our lighting. So we're going to come back to this and check our scene lights and world. We're going to hit 1, and we're going to hit Shift A, mesh, plane, and we're just going to scale it up really big, rotate on the X 90, and then we're going to hit G, Y, and just bring this back. We don't want it too close to these to ensure that the light spills correctly. Then we're going to hit Shift A, light, point lamp. And we're going to move that closer to the wall, and then we're going to bring this up to about 2500. That looks a bit bright, so maybe 1500. Yeah, and then we're going to duplicate this plane, Shift D, Y, and just hold Control, and then we're going to rotate on the X 180 so that the correct face is facing outwards. And then we're going to come to this Object tab here and hit Viewport Display, call it Wire, and Visibility, and we're going to uncheck Camera. Now we can see through it so that our camera is not blocked by that plane. Now we can see that we get some really cool bubble effects when we're looking through this. Now we're going to hit 1, then we're going to hit View, Align View to Cursor, and then Shift A, Camera, Camera, and then Control-Alt-0, and that will center everything correctly without us having to do much work, and then we can just zoom in and out with the camera to view. That's looking pretty good right there. And sweetness. I might zoom out just a bit. There we go. Yeah, that looks great. Sweet. And now all you have to do to change the color is adjust the point light color. So maybe we want like a slightly warmer tone, or we could go kind of a colder blue like we did with my renders online. This is looking pretty darn good. Alrighty, that is how I made the first effect. Next, we're going to hit Control S to save this, and then we're going to hit Control Shift S and just make a second version of this. Now, we're doing this just to make it easier for us to make the next project file so we don't have to redo all of our work. So I'm just going to delete that skin, and then I'm also going to delete those bouncy ball alembics, and we're going to reactivate our cloth sim ones, and we're going to delete our bakes. We're going to come here to the cloth settings, and we're just going to, it looks like we don't have a bake right now, so we're just going to delete all bakes to make sure. And then we can see that they play alive, and we're going to hit tab and we're going to go into wireframe mode, and we're just going to start moving these around because we want to clear them from the center so that we can make the negative fill effect. Oops, Control L, G, Shift D, scale, Shift D, scale down. Maybe grab these, Control L, Shift D, rotate, G, Shift D. Control L, G. And we're just going to keep doing a few of these. This looks like a good number. Now we're going to try and make sure that they're all on the same plane. So Control L, G, Y. And we're just going to try and get them centered along the x-axis. So we're just going to bring these in. Control L, G, Y. Control L, G, Y. Control L, G, Y. All right, that's looking pretty darn good. So we've got this open space, and we're going to hit Shift A when we're out in object mode, and we're going to hit cube. Now that's pretty much the right size of cube I want. And hit Tab 1, maybe scale it up a little bit. And then we're going to hit 3, and I'm just going to select here in the middle from the camera view and just delete the faces. Now we have these other faces. If we hit 2, I can Control Alt edge select these other edges and hit E, and then escape, and then scale. And I'm going to hit Shift Y to scale it on everything that's not perpendicular to that. Then we can just scale it on the Z-axis to bring that into the right frame, and that looks good to me. The reason we're doing this is going to be our container, and that ensures that our bubbles fit correctly when it's making the negative space. Now, we're also going to make a shape key really quick, just so that we can adjust the distance between these so that we can squish those spheres really into a nice pocket and make sure that they're distributed equally. So we're going to hit Tab, and as long as we're on key, I'm just going to turn the value up to 1. I'm just going to hit Scale Y and just bring that in like this. And then if I hit Tab, then now we can control that right there. And you can find that in the Vertex Groups tab here, or the Object Data Properties is the actual name of the tab. And then we can see that it's getting ignored. So we will select it, go to the simulation, and call it a collision, and uncheck single-sided. Now if we play, boom, we've got these sweet spheres. And then if we animate our shape key, which is in that Vertex tab, we can then select this, and we can hit I, and then at frame 10, basically whenever these start impacting, then we're going to want it to constrict. So let's just say 1 or 0.75. We don't need to go all the way. And there we go. That just ensures that it really squishes down. Oh yeah, let's say 20, and let's just say 1, and then I forgot to hit I. Okay, now it should work correctly. And you can see that now it squishes them and makes sure that there's not too much space for the balls to go behind and in front of each other. That increases the likelihood that your spheres are going to be evenly distributed. So it looks like we need to increase that distance on our simulation for the cloth. So we're just going to say that quality goes up to 12. And then if you need to, if you keep having issues with it intersecting like this, because for example that one's already intersecting, then the best way to deal with it is just to scale that sphere down. But if that's not your option, if that's not your issue, then you can just increase the subdivision on this plane, and that will help with the collisions. But we're going to try and keep things clean and light, and that creates a nice squish effect on that view. Let's look at how that's going. I want to maybe tab A, rotate these around like this, just to see what that does to the simulation. Yeah, I like that way more. Sweet. And then on this one, I actually kind of want to bring that pressure up, or even better, let's just bring the force down. Let's call that -500. And then we should get less insane destruction between those sphere pieces. And it settles in nicely around that. Maybe we can set it -750 to get a nice equivalent like that. Sweet. That looks pretty darn good. So I'm going to just bake that out. So select these, scroll down to that and click bake. Now that we have that baked, let's just look at this, and that looks nice. That looks really great. Now we have this big plane in our way, so let's come in and in the object properties, let's just make that invisible to the camera and make it a wire. Now we'll see that it's affecting all of this other stuff. Let's just hide it. It doesn't need to be in the scene at all. Now we can export this as an alembic, and we'll do the same thing that we did for the last one. Make sure that our selected objects is on, apply subdivisions, and export hair stuff is off. That should go really quickly. Now let's just hide that and import our alembic. There we go. Now let's apply our glass material and let's just see how that looks. Wonderful. Looks awesome. Sweet. Now you should get the idea of how that will work if you have even more, and that can create a really nice bubble effect. Now we're just going to add the actual bubble particle system. Click on hair, change that number to, I don't know, 2500, set it to volume, bring our jittering amount up to 2. Then we're going to take the object as our render, and we're going to drop select that bubble, and we're going to see insanity, so 0.005, and we're going to change that scale to 0.8. Now we've got some sparse bubbles, so let's change that to 0.075. Man, 0.0075. We got an unusual distribution over here, so let's just change that seed. See if we get anything better. Say 0.1. So those are just too big for me. So we're going to sacrifice and say 0.05. And this one's going to be tiny. So let's stick to 0.075. Good enough. And we'll just drag that down to equal them out a bit. And then we can bring that size down to 0.05 in general. 0.075. We're just going to stick with that. Man, that is a small number. Now that should be it for the negative space. This gives you a nice place to put like a square graphic, or you could put text. And you can do this with any shape. It doesn't have to be a square, but you get the idea. Now we're going to hit Shift S, and we're going to hit Control Shift S and resave this as a Fuild 3. And then we're going to delete the alembic file again, and we're going to unhide these, and we're actually just going to delete these as well, because now we're going to make the plane with the fake water. And we're going to just scale one up and bring it in here like this. And then we're just going to, that's way too big. Let's bring that down like this. Perfect. And then we're going to just subdivide that. One more time. Whoops. Subdivide. Cool. Alrighty. Then we're going to select that same glass material that we used. If we go to 0, then we should probably move this point lamp down and then closer to the wall. Just a little bit. And then we're going to bring that up to 2000. And then what we're going to do is we're going to hit Shift A. And we're just going to use a UV sphere this time. And we're going to make a new particle system. And we're going to set the number to like 50. and then we're going to change it to hair, volume, jittered amount, and then we're going to change the render path like usual to our instanced bubble. Now, if everything works correctly, and we change these to like that, then if we set it to a glass material, we should have, after we shade it smooth of course, we should have a lovely particle system. I set these too small, 0.01. That is not looking correct. This is not, there we go. I just had to agitate it. For some reason it wasn't showing up. So we're just going to bring those sizes down. 0.01 looks great. Control S. And now if we go into rendered view, we've got a lovely little bubble. Now if we scale that down just a little bit, Control A, apply that scale. Then we can bring it up, and then we can hit auto keyframing and hit G0. And then we can come to frame 40 and hit GZ, and then just bring that down. And then in the timeline, right click and click interpolation mode and linear. That will then make it fall. And then we're just going to set it to, in the simulation properties, a dynamic paint brush, add brush. And then this area will be the canvas, add canvas, change the surface type to waves, and then you can basically sculpt your splashes with this. That is how I made the third view. And then one of the last ones was that lovely kind of honey viscous fluid looking simulation. Now that was actually not fluid either. That was just a cloth, one plane, and it was flowing across the surface of the pieces. So what we're going to do is we're just going to hit Control S, Control Shift S, and then we're going to save this as a fourth file. Then we're going to delete that plane, and what we're going to do is in solid view, which by hitting Z and then clicking on solid, then we will just take this sphere and just move it right here. I'm going to Shift D to duplicate it, bring it out again, and then hit Shift D and bring one really low and kind of in front of it. And then just do that again, Shift D. And this one right here, we're just going to bring it like that. And we're just going to scale it on the X axis like this so that it has more area. And I'm just doing these to build kind of steps for cloth to fall on. And we want to frame them around the view of the camera a little bit just so that we can guide the fabric. I almost want these to be like this, and we're going to remove any dynamic paint brushes from all of these that I forgot to do before we started working. So be sure to do that and get rid of your particle systems on these. Alrighty, there we go. Next, we're going to bring that camera in because we're going to want to be really close to this. Then we're going to come out of that view, hit Shift A plane, scale it up, Control A scale, tab, and we're just going to right click and subdivide it a few times. That's a good start, and we're going to scale it up again and then subdivide it one more time. Now we're going to rotate it on the X so it's got kind of this curve, and we're just going to move it up. And then these need to all be collision objects. So if we come down here and click on this, we can just snag all of these as a collision. Probably would have been smart to do this before duplicating all the spheres, but we're working as we're adding out the bubble though. And then if we hit, what? Oh, yes. Also hit A, and then hit A in the timeline area, and then hit delete to delete any keyframes. That should fix everything. Then we select this, call it a cloth, and just hit tab to see what happens. We have something interacting. Oh, we have a cube hidden here. So let's take this and just delete that as well. And then we should be able to simulate that cloth correctly now. Now that looks really good. I want to bring this guy just a little bit forward because I liked how that cloth was bending. Let's see how it does it again. That looks nice. Yes, that's perfect. Then we're going to right click and shade smooth. Now the way we get that milky, smooth, viscous look is we just slow the cloth sim down to 0.15 of its original speed. And if we hit play again, it's going to be really slow. We can bring the simulation cache up to like 500 or 600, and then it will just keep simulating. And let's just bake it to be faster. Once it's baked out, then when you click, you can see that it will take a bit. Let's just bring this end out and zoom out with our wheel. And now we can see, if you're close, you can see how it would flow similar to a viscous layered fluid. And so now the trick is we just shade it smooth and then hit Control-1 to add a subdivision surface to it. And then we're just going to add a solidify and take the offset. No, we want to keep the offset of -1. So leave it as it is. Thickness, that's fine. I'm going to bring this up before the subdivision. And then we should be able to see a nice flowy view in our camera. And that is super cool. If we then add the glass material to it, although we cannot see a ton right now, we can see if we move our point light one direction or the other, we might be able to highlight some of these curves a bit better. And then if we hit Shift A, add a second area light, hit GZ, and then just make it big, very gigantic kind of thing. Maybe not that bright though, 500. But I kind of want to bounce it off of one of these planes. And remember, this plane is still reflecting light, which is really good for us. So then we can see that it may bounce off of that plane instead of directly hitting the cloth. Alrighty. Now that we can kind of see the movement of the cloth, I don't like seeing this, so we're just going to bring that camera in just a bit further and just a bit lower. Then the last secret sauce to this is adding a particle system again. So we're going to go hair, faces this time, leave it at 1000, then hit object, instance object, and select bubble. Now we've got a gajillion bubbles, so let's just bring their massive size down to something reasonable and change the scale randomness to 0.8, and then just play with that size. Now, one thing we do want to note is we do not want them showing on the outside face, or it will look like the bubbles are outside of it, and air bubbles can exist like they look like in water unless they're in water. And so we just want them to show up on the other side of the face. So we can fix that by changing this offset to 1. And then we can also tell it to follow the modifier stack. And then if we select it on the vertices, we can get a different result. But we just need to scale these down. And if 0.01 is as small as it will go, then all we need to do is increase that thickness. It might take some adjustment, and as you can see, it's not perfect the first time. Let's just see what some of these other settings do. That is exactly what I wanted. Everything on the back face. So faces random without using the modifier stack. And they'll show up on the back, but we won't see the back. And so when we go into this view, they look like they're inside of it. And as it flows, we can get a nice gradient like that. We can also try scaling the different radius of this light and moving it. I really like what it's doing right here. Having that bottom lit kind of accentuates those curves. Since we have auto keyframing on, we accidentally moved the light, so I'm just going to delete that first keyframe because we want it down there. Sweet. Okay, that is how I made all of these shots with the fluid. And so, hopefully these were helpful methods. And the last step would be to render. So we're just going to come in here, we're going to set file format to PNG, 8, delete the compression, select a good folder, And then we can make sure we're at 24 frames a second, 1080p. You can double that to 200% if you want to render at 4K, but I recommend staying at 1080p. And then in here, I render with 300 max samples at a noise threshold of 0.01, GPU cycles. Don't change your light paths lower than 12 because this is using glass to render, and I use these settings for all of them. One of the things you can do is check persistent data, and that will ensure that all of the data that is cached can be used for the next frame, saving you a lot of render time. Then we're going to just change our color management look to medium high contrast, and we can start rendering. I want to find a frame that I like first before, so let's start at frame 300, and then we can render that out and just hit render animation. And then as you can see, we get some sweet flowy fluids. In this specific shot, I did find it was good to turn the motion blur down to 0.02 just to reduce the amount of motion blur that was happening in each frame, because they appeared blurry just because of how much motion blur there was, even though they were moving fairly slowly because the camera's so close to them. So I would recommend doing that. Alright, I hope that tutorial was useful for you guys. I hope that it helped you guys get some ideas of how you might approach a problem that a client presents to you creatively inside of Blender. Because sometimes the obvious solution isn't always the right solution, like fluid sim versus cloth sim, dynamic canvas versus real fluid sim. So there's a lot of options. Hopefully that helped you a lot. If you guys make something really cool with this tutorial, post it on Instagram, tag me, and I'll repost it because I'm excited to see what you guys are going to make. Also, next week, I'm going to be creating a tutorial on my photo scans workflow using my iPhone to take images in Polycam for free, and how to get credits to do that for free, and then how to take them into Blender, clean them up, and make them look very high quality. So if you're excited for that, next Friday, check that out on my channel at 8 o'clock. Other than that, thank you so much to all the new people that have found me on Instagram and YouTube. Your guys' support is much appreciated. And as always, create more than you consume.